When Margaret Wilson, wife of Commissioner James Wilson, faced an unjust police intrusion at home, young officer Adam Harris spoke out, defying his colleagues and risking everything. When Commissioner Wilson arrived, an unexpected twist left the city in shock. A summer day in the heart of the metropolis blazed under the scorching sun, reflecting off the glass facades of tall buildings and making the asphalt appear to shimmer with heat. The sounds of traffic, bicycle bells, laughter of passers-by, and the shouts of street vendors merged into a continuous hum, highlighting the rhythm of life in the big city. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, mingled with hints of exhaust fumes and a faint touch of jasmine wafting from flower beds along the sidewalks. Margaret Wilson, an elegant middle-aged woman with wise, calm eyes and impeccably styled chestnut hair, walked down the sidewalk with confidence and poise. She wore a light dress that emphasized her refined taste and a small dove-shaped brooch, symbolizing peace and hope that she always donned for business meetings. Today's visit to the Children's Aid Foundation had gone well, and Margaret recalled the grateful glances of mothers whose children received much-needed support, a gentle smile playing on her lips. But the scene was abruptly disrupted by the screech of tires. 2 patrol cars, their red and blue lights flashing, stopped right in front of her home. Margaret froze for a moment, gathering herself as she had always done when facing the unexpected. 2 officers stepped out of the vehicles. The first, a tall man with sharp chiseled features, an impenetrable gaze, and tightly pressed lips, looked stern. His partner, shorter, with a youthful but weary face, nervously fidgeted with the brim of his cap. Margaret took a step forward and, maintaining her composure, addressed them. "Excuse me, what's going on?" Her voice carried both surprise and a note of concern. The tall officer cast a quick, almost dismissive glance at his partner and replied, "We've received a report of suspicious activity. We need to search your house." Margaret's brows shot up involuntarily, but she restrained the surge of indignation. She knew the law well and understood that such a demand without a warrant was illegal. Remembering her husband's advice to avoid confrontations, she steadied herself and said softly, "Of course, but perhaps it would be better to wait for my husband. He's the police commissioner, and it might be easier to explain the situation to him." But the officer showed no sign of respect. Crossing his arms over his chest, he responded sharply, "This isn't up for discussion, ma'am." His voice was as cold as steel. Those words echoed in Margaret's mind like a verdict, as the officers, not waiting for her consent, brushed past her, leaving her standing at the threshold with a pounding heart and the realization that the situation could spiral out of control. The officers barged into the house, their indifference palpable as they moved without consideration for privacy or dignity. Heavy footsteps reverberated through the rooms, while the metallic clang of tools prying open drawers and tapping on walls shattered the otherwise quiet air. One officer, eyes narrowed and jaw set, yanked open the hallway closet, sending coats, scarves, and umbrellas tumbling to the floor like fallen soldiers. Another flipped the living room table, sending papers, books, and even framed photos scattering across the rug in a chaotic, disordered mess. The noise was deafening, the brutal invasion turning the home's once serene atmosphere into a war zone. Margaret stood in the hallway, rooted to the spot, trembling with a mix of anger and helplessness. Her hands clenched the hem of her dress so tightly that her nails left deep crescents in her palms. The urge to scream at the intruders burned within her, but she swallowed it down, knowing any outburst could be twisted and used against her. The ringing in her ears amplified each thud and crash, but she forced herself to stay composed, recalling her husband's voice, that steadfast reminder to maintain dignity even in the darkest moments. Meanwhile, outside, a crowd began to gather. Neighbors peeked from their porches and clustered on the sidewalk, some with concern etched on their faces, others with judgmental stares. The glow of raised phone screens illuminated their expressions, capturing the event in shaky videos, each eager for a glimpse of drama or truth. The whispers and low conversations among them rose above the wail of distant sirens and the idling engines of police vehicles. Among the spectators stood young officer Adam Harris, eyes fixated on the scene unfolding inside. A knot of tension grew in his chest as he watched his colleagues ransack a home that should have been inviolable. The weight of his badge felt heavier than ever, a reminder of his oath to uphold justice and protect the innocent. Yet here he was, caught between fear for his career and the voice of conscience that grew louder with each moment of violation he witnessed. His jaw tightened as the inner turmoil reached its peak. Steeling himself, Adam stepped away from the sidelines, pushing through the murmuring crowd. His heart drummed a relentless beat, each step forward resonating with the risk he was about to take. But he knew that staying silent, letting injustice go unchecked, would mean betraying everything he believed in. The noise of the crowd fell to a whisper as the sleek black official car glided to a halt by the curb. James Wilson emerged, his tall frame and commanding presence casting a long shadow over the gathered onlookers. The crisp lines of his tailored suit and the steely resolve in his eyes spoke of authority that demanded respect, if not outright fear. He moved with a determined stride, cutting through the crowd like a blade, the space parting before him as if instinctively yielding to his dominance. Each step echoed a silent declaration that he was not just a figurehead, he was power personified. Inside, the chaos of the ransacked home met with sudden, suffocating silence. Officers, who moments before had operated with reckless abandon, now stood frozen, their confidence drained under the weight of realization. The senior officer, previously brimming with unchecked arrogance, now visibly paled, his posture rigid with barely contained anxiety. His hands curled tightly into fists at his sides, fingers trembling as he tried to mask his apprehension. The sharp glint in James Wilson's eyes promised there would be no easy way out of this. James halted before the senior officer, his gaze drilling into him with an intensity that could bend steel. "Explain to me what's going on," he said, his voice low, each syllable deliberate, laced with an iciness that turned the room colder than any winter wind. It was the kind of calm that promised retribution more fearsome than any outburst. The senior officer swallowed hard, his pulse racing as he struggled for composure, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. "Commissioner Wilson, this was a misunderstanding." His voice wavered, every word sounding weaker than the last as he realized how thin his defense truly was. "A misunderstanding?" James's tone lifted slightly, the anger sharpening its edge as it cut through the false air of professionalism. His eyes narrowed, jaw clenched with barely restrained fury. "You forced your way into my home, degraded my wife, and trampled over protocol without a second thought. Do you understand the gravity of your actions, the repercussions you now face?" His gaze swept over the room, each officer shrinking under its weight, knowing full well that this was not just a reprimand. It was the prelude to their reckoning. The silence that followed was suffocating, charged with tension that crackled like a live wire. The officers who moments ago felt untouchable now felt the ground shift beneath their feet, a chasm of consequences opening wide, ready to swallow them whole. In the tense silence following the commissioner's words, everyone could hear their own heartbeat. The eyes of the crowd turned to Adam Harris, the young officer whose voice, trembling with inner conflict, spoke with unexpected boldness. "Commissioner, I was a witness. They overstepped their authority. This wasn't sanctioned." These words shattered the silence, and whispers swept through the crowd. Neighbors exchanged glances, some even looking at Adam with newfound respect, understanding that his admission had taken great courage. The officers, who had seemed confident and unafraid moments ago, began to glance at each other uneasily, shame and fear washing over their faces. One of them, trying to preserve a shred of dignity, muttered, "We were just following orders." But James Wilson raised a hand, cutting off any excuses. His voice was cold and firm. "This incident will not be overlooked. Every officer who overstepped their authority will be held accountable." A deep pause conveyed to everyone present that there would be no turning back. The people outside the house began to murmur more loudly. Some even recorded the unfolding scene on video. The commissioner's gaze shifted to Adam, and their eyes met. The young officer felt the tension in his body release, and a faint hope ignited within him that his actions had not been in vain. In the weeks that followed the incident, News of the event spread throughout the city and beyond. Newspaper headlines read, "Commissioner Wilson takes a stand against police misconduct." The disciplinary actions taken against the officers became a symbol of change and an important step in the fight against abuse. For Margaret and James, it was not just a moment of personal trial, but the starting point for sweeping reforms in a system that had long resisted change. As Margaret restored order to her home and regained her inner peace, she knew this experience had changed her forever. James, contemplating future steps, understood that his duty was not just to protect his family, but to use his authority to ensure that such abuses would never happen again.